Welcome back to another episode of the Open Source Cafe. Really excited for this one. Thanks a lot for joining, Lane. And today we're going to talk about one of the best ways to become a backend developer, because there are millions of developers in the world. Everyone has a different path and success stories. So we try to highlight these success stories on the channel. And today we have an amazing person with us here today. Lane, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, my name's Lane. I've been running a side project for a couple of years now, Boot.dev. And really, it kind of came about because my wife couldn't find the resources that I wanted her to find when she was getting into to software development. So, it's, we have some pretty strong opinions about the best way to become specifically a back-end engineer, back-end web developer. And the platform, kind of embodies all of those opinions. So it's a very linear path, right, to becoming a back-end developer.
Amazing, and thanks a lot for sharing. I see some drums behind you as well. So do you?
Yeah, absolutely. I just got drums for the first time in about 10 years. I finally have a kit again. I played in high school, but it's been about a decade, so now I just play for fun.
Nice, nice, cool. So can you tell us a little bit more about like Boot.dev? Yeah, you mentioned you're working on
Yeah,
it.
totally. So I started it a little over 2 years ago while I was on vacation. I was with my family at the lake, and I was a little bored one afternoon, so I started kind of just throwing things together. Um, and really, there's kind of just a few key objectives that I started with. I wanted a linear curriculum. So my wife was, like I mentioned, I kind of started this project for my wife who wanted to get into coding out of the medical industry, and she was struggling with um, finding tons and tons of courses online, but not knowing which ones to start with and like which ones are better than others, right? So, for example, she kind of knew she wanted to start with maybe JavaScript or Python, but she'd go and look at different courses, and she wasn't sure which concepts she needed to learn first, right? Like, should I learn object-oriented programming? Should I maybe dive right into a framework? Like, all these sorts of questions started to crop up, and of course, me coming from like a CS background, I'm like, oh, well, like there should be a fairly linear curriculum that you can follow. It's like, okay, take these like 30 courses in order and you'll be, well on your way to development. And so that was like the first step, was like, I want CS content and I wanted it in a linear path for her to take. And I just couldn't find that anywhere.
I agree. Most people say this, that you can learn anything online, and
Yeah.
if that's true, then why is it that such highly paid boot camps of tens of thousands of dollars are in business? Because there's content online, and even like Boot.dev, the pricing I saw, so much cheaper, as compared to let's say thousands of bucks. So I think it's all about compiling resources in one place. That's what most people like, um, and I think that's good as well because it saves them time, and then they can explore it themselves, giving them a proper roadmap sort of thing. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cost is one thing, right? Like,
Hmm.
I went through the university program, and at least here in the States, it can be very expensive and time consuming. And
Hmm.
and boot camps can also be expensive and time consuming, less so. But there's this whole other slew of problems that maybe we could talk about later. I don't think it's all bad, right? I think a traditional CS degree is a great way to go, or can be a great way to go. I think traditional boot camps can be a great way to go, but I think it's important that everyone's aware of kind of the pros and cons of each approach. And
Hmm.
you know what I built Boot.dev for was optimizing for some specific things. And yeah, we can definitely get deeper into that.
Yeah. Before we get started, if you want to learn more about Boot.dev, there are some amazing courses that you can check out. I like how it's like really interactive, and we'll talk more about the learning process. But you can check out the link in the description below and get started. So let's talk about the backend part. We're going to talk about the learning part. You mentioned about universities, right? So how important is like an understanding of computer science when we talk about being a backend developer, for example? I mean, I know it's a pretty obvious question, but for some students, yeah,
Yeah,
they,
so I
they
mean,
ask me, right? The questions they ask are like, is college education, what they teach in college, really beneficial or whatever?
right.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much we could spend an entire hour here. I'll try to start with the nutshell approach. So it depends a lot on the employer. There's going to be some employers that straight up just like require a CS degree. In my experience, that's the vast minority of employers, especially in 2022. Most jobs are not going to require a CS degree anymore, though you might find them here and there. Um, Anecdotally, the team I work on currently, of the four of us on my team, I work in kind of Go, microservices, Kubernetes backend team. Everyone has a CS degree. That's not a requirement, but it just so happens that when we are hiring, the things we are looking for are usually very performance focused. We do a lot of stuff with a lot of data, and so we need people that can solve algorithmic problems. And so it's very important. On the some of the other teams that I work directly with, there's kind of a less of an importance on CS, and I think it's because a lot of those teams are doing more just kind of CRUD apps, right? So kind of Ruby on Rails or Node Express kind of work where you're just taking some data from the front end, shoving it into the database, grabbing it back out, and it's just a little less necessary that you have that kind of algorithmic training. So I guess the way to sum it up, I would say, is depending on the job you want, CS can be more or less important. And I think for back-end developers, it tends to be much more important than for front-end developers. As a general rule, I think it's always great to have an understanding, but it tends to be more useful for back-end work.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're talking about, so that's what I keep saying as well, like, even if you're not going to college, having a good understanding of, like, basics of algorithms, data structures, and how the computers work in general cannot do you much harm. Like, it's always good to have that knowledge, how the internet works and things like that. But cool. And when we talk about learning to code, one more thing that I see folks struggle with is, what do you call it? What's it called? Tutorial hell. So they keep watching
Yeah.
videos and everything. I don't think, like, what are your thoughts about that being a learning approach, and how would you encounter that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Tutorial hell is a huge problem. So in my mind, there's kind of two versions of tutorial hell. I think the more popular one is the one where you kind of watch videos over and over and over again, and then you never actually like build a project, right? So you kind of consume passively all of this content, and you feel like you're learning, but really all you're doing is kind of becoming familiar with terms. Because at least in my experience, after watching hours and hours of videos and then you just go to implement something, it's easy to get lost and kind of remember or forget all the details that you thought you had learned, that didn't really sink in. So that's why the stuff we're doing at Boot.dev is all extremely interactive, extremely hands-on. It actually kicks you out of the platform to go build projects to upload to your GitHub every so often. So it's like, learn a concept, build a project that uses the concept. Learn another concept, go build another project. So that's kind of point number one. And then point number two with tutorial hell, I think, is just a little different. It's like you're consuming all the same kind of content from so many different sources. So it's almost like you're just kind of learning the same things over and over again with no like direct path in mind to a goal. So this comes back to kind of the linear curriculum that I'm a huge believer in. For example, if you, I don't know, there's the cliche that you buy like 20 Udemy courses and maybe only watch like 3 of them, right? The idea is, so again, it comes back to just this idea of like, you want to have a very clear path for yourself, and it's okay if you assemble the path. Like, there's nothing wrong with Udemy. You can go find all the different courses you need and kind of set out a learning path for yourself. But in my opinion, it's just super important that you have a path and you have a goal in mind.
I agree. And since we're talking about, like, the having a knowledge of computer science, you can also check out Boot.dev's free to audit computer science program roadmap. I'll leave the link to that also in the description below. But good point you mentioned about the learning path, right? But the thing with learning path is that folks find it a little bit difficult to to figure out what do I do next. With backend, for example, let's say you're learning about a language, then some tools and frameworks and things like that. But then folks, how do you decide? That roadmap thing. And also one more thing you mentioned was consuming too much content. I'm a huge believer in that. Like, don't it doesn't matter that much, especially so since we're talking about backend development. Doesn't matter how many videos you watch if you yourself not are trying things and getting stuck and googling on Stack Overflow and then learning. Learn by doing, basically. So about the roadmap, Lane, like, can you share a little bit more about it? How would one go about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, there's kind of two ways to do it. And I would argue that the newer you are to programming, the more you should rely on somebody else's roadmap, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So when you're brand new, it's really great to have something like Boot.dev or really any other linear curriculum that tells you, start with A, move to B, move to C. As you start to get more and more familiar, you can start to kind of assemble your own journey a little bit, right? Like, you kind of know that the CS thing is important, but also you're really interested in, say, like, I don't know, the Express server. So you go and dabble in some Node stuff. It's like the more experienced you get, the more I would argue you should probably be doing some of it yourself. But yeah, definitely the newer you are, the more you should be relying on again kind of a linear path to somewhere. And it's important that you know where you want to go. I talk to so many people who like want to just learn to code, doing that in quotations, and it's like if all you know is you want to learn to code, it's really hard to help you, right? Do you want to learn to code because you want to start your own business? Do you want to learn to code because you're interested in like kind of front end graphic design work, right? Or do you want to do front end engineering work? Do you want to work on big data? Do you want, like, there's so many things that you could do, that pretty early on, I think it's important to try to figure out what you're most interested in. Doesn't mean you need to pick like a final end state, that you never deviate from. But it's important to kind of figure out what your goals are, because that's going to dictate what the best platforms to learn on are, who the best people to follow are, what the best YouTube channels are to watch, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, start with a goal in mind. That's kind of it's so much more important to figure out what your goal is than like what your technologies are. So many people come to me and say, what language should I learn first? I'm like, well, that totally depends on what you want to do, right?
You can do, you have to think about that. I love that point because the question I get, and then I'm like blank, speechless, is people say, which programming language should I learn to get a job? How do I answer that? Like,
Yeah, exactly. That's like,
any.
yeah, every language basically has jobs open for it, right?
Yeah, so try to think about what you want to do. And I love that, this is where the T-shape or pie-shape learning comes in, that I share with people, that if you don't know what you want to do in life, in a career, try out different things, see what you like, then do a deep dive into it, or make a career with it. So what do you think about that, Lane?
Yeah, that's awesome that you bring that up. I mean, right on our kind of about page where we lay out some of our opinions, we talk about the T-shape um, developer. I think it's the best way to go about getting your first job. And just to give a little bit more of a background in case anyone isn't familiar with what it means, the whole idea is that you're trying to become a developer whose skill set is shaped like a capital T, where the top bar of the T represents your breadth of knowledge across like many different areas of programming, right? So maybe you're familiar with a little bit about networking, you're familiar with some front end stuff, you're familiar with some back end stuff, you kind of know how to set up some CI/CD, maybe you've dabbled in Kubernetes. The idea is you get familiar with all these different technologies, but you're not really an expert in them. And then you pick one thing that you really enjoy and you become an expert in that one thing. Um, and people who do that, who build that T shape, tend to be, in my experience, the most successful in the job market, because um, that's just what's most useful like at work. You know that you're an expert in the thing that you do most of the day, so you're highly effective. But then when weird edge case stuff comes up, you're familiar enough that you know how to go look it up and kind of figure it out. Um, so when you're really trying to differentiate yourself in job interviews and things like that, it really shows when you have that T-shaped skill set, and it gives you a niche. Like just like how when you're building a product, you want to have a niche for your product. You want to have a niche for yourself as a developer, right? You want to kind of be an expert in one or two things so that when you go interview, you don't just say, oh, I can do whatever you want. That sounds terrible to the people you're interviewing for, right? You want to be able to say, oh no, I spend most of my time in these technologies or working with these sets of tools. Makes you look really good in that area.
I totally agree with that point, and it also looks a little bit more like, okay, this person has done their research or whatever, and jobs, and especially for new grads and like new jobs and internships, it's not just about the work you're doing. I mean, obviously it is, but a good employer will also ask you, if you're just starting out in tech, like how can we support your career. So it's also about your own growth and um, personal development. Cool. So since we're talking about learning, we often talk about learning in public or working together in a group. What are the benefits for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is where now, like, this is where the conversation really gets interesting to me, because this is where I think a lot of online learning has failed. And I would argue, even at Boot.dev, we're not doing as good of a job as I would like. This is something we'd like to really improve on in the future. So, when you go to like a boot camp or a brick and mortar college, one of the best benefits you have is that there's some external pressures put on you, that like motivate you to keep moving forward. So, for example, let's just say that you go to a traditional CS degree at university. You're probably paying thousands of dollars to be there, right? So you have this financial motivation to actually complete your courses, because if you don't, you just wasted thousands of dollars. You also have kind of, as you mentioned, friends and peers that you're there in class with. So you have social pressure that's kind of keeping you on track and motivated to keep moving forward. And I think that bit, the social pressure, is the thing that we really need to figure out in online learning. Like, how can you get like a cohort of friends that are all doing the same like program online in order to help each other stay motivated, provide support, and honestly just create some pressure so that you're motivated to actually finish the course. This is like the huge problem with online learning. It's, again, comes back to the Udemy thing of like buying all these courses and not finishing them. Um, you want that social pressure, even if it's manufactured. I don't know, have you ever been involved in like a book club where you like read a book with a group of friends?
We had something like that, club like that in high school. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really nice when you have a group of friends that you're reading with, because you like have deadlines, right? You don't like lose grades or anything if you like don't read your chapter, but it's like kind of embarrassing to like show up and be like the only one that didn't read. um, so I think there's some interesting things for us as kind of online educators to figure out, in order to help people get some of that motivation that they would get in a traditional environment without all of the insane like costs and overheads and inconveniences that come along with it. And I think I would call it cohort-based learning, or like learning with a group of friends is probably there's some way to build that, and make it work. So for us, what we're doing at the moment is just a Discord server, right, where kind of all our best students hang out and chat and provide help, and like all the achievements get shared and unlocked in there. But I think there's still so much more we could do.
Yeah, there's always room for improvement, and the good thing about learning in this public is that you're gonna get feedback, from from people around the world, and that's what I always say. Like, ask your questions in public, because someone else may have asked the same question or something like that. Cool. So yeah, we talked about roadmap part, we talked about resources part, we talked about learning approaches. You can check out the links in the description below, for Boot.dev. and there's a code as well that you can use to get some discounts. But one more thing I want to talk about is, so when you talk about, like, if you're talking about backend development, there's so many tools and frameworks and libraries that keep coming out, and updates keep happening, and as a developer, learning is inevitable. So how do you stay up to date with all these technologies is basically the question, even after like 10
That's
years of experience.
yeah, that's a really good question. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen, I've definitely worked with people who have been really good about keeping their skill sets up to date. I've also worked with people who kind of don't, and it is honestly kind of sucks. It's hard to stay competitive in the job market if you just kind of let your skill set stagnate. Um, but assuming that I'm assuming most of your audience is kind of people learning. Um, there's just a couple pieces of advice. So the first is I wouldn't waste time learning fairly out of date technologies, right? Like the line to draw there is very blurry, and you kind of have to decide for yourself. But like I can say with confidence that COBOL is the wrong language to be spending all your time on in 2022. Um, so uh, what I would say is, especially if you're towards the beginning of your learning journey, if you're new, if you haven't had your first job yet, you should be learning evergreen concepts. That's why at Boot.dev we focus so much on computer science, because computer science doesn't change, right? The languages we write algorithms in, like JavaScript or Python or Go or what have you, those change, right? The tooling we use changes. Like it's VS Code now for me, but who knows what it'll be in the future. All that stuff changes, but the core concepts don't. So if you build yourself a really solid foundation, it becomes very easy to swap out tools, right? I've probably used 4 different IDEs over my programming career, quite heavily, and it hasn't been too painful to move between them. It certainly hasn't required me to go take courses or anything like that. The foundation stays very solid. So what I would recommend is try to find a place that teaches you evergreen concepts with the most up-to-date technologies possible, right? So that way you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're quite up to date on like your syntax, right? You're not learning Python 2, you should be learning Python 3, things like that. But the concepts you're learning are going to continue to be useful. That's also why I recommend people don't jump immediately into frameworks, right? If your goal is to be a front end developer, for example, which isn't really necessarily the kind of the target audience of Boot.dev, though we do have maybe 30% of our learners are front end focused. I wouldn't have them go straight to React. I'd have them go learn vanilla JavaScript. I'd have them learn how the browser works, how the DOM works, all the fundamentals. And then once they have a solid foundation, great. Like go pick the framework that you want to learn now, whether that's Vue or React or Svelte or whatever. It's so much easier now that you have this solid foundation.
Couldn't agree more. Never underestimate the fundamentals. Like I see people in their first semester don't know what binary search is, and they're jumping on machine learning. So um, with ML as well, you have to learn statistics, linear algebra, and things like that. Cool. So one last question I have for you is, since we are talking about you know developers and backend developers specifically, um, about getting hired, right? How does one set their career goals and get a full time job, basically? Yeah.
That's a really good question. When you have like a CS degree, for example, and this is something you wouldn't even get at a traditional boot camp. But let's assume, like with a CS degree, you have this like nice piece of paper that says, "I know all of these things. This university says so. They tested me on it," and that's like a really great. You get like a sense of security and a sense of confidence from having that piece of paper. But like we talked about earlier, most jobs don't actually require that piece of paper. And what's much more important is how you present yourself so that you can get an interview. And then once you get an interview, how you can show off your skills to the employer. Because I also have quite a few friends who have CS degrees and still don't have jobs, right? Some of my classmates from college. And it's usually because, they look okay on paper. Their resumes probably still aren't amazing, but they really struggle in interviews. And so it's not having a CS degree like it's fine. You just need to be able to get yourself into the interviews. So what we focus on at Boot.dev is projects. Like some people worry about certifications. Personally, I don't think they're quite as important. I don't think they hurt. It's fine to have a bunch of certifications, but like they're not what's going to get you the job. Nobody looks at a certification from some random course that you took online and goes, "Oh, this is great! Like you have the job." Um, so we focus a lot more on, all right, we're going to build all these solid foundational concepts in your head so that when you get asked algorithmic questions and stuff in interviews, you can actually answer them. But then the way we actually make you look good on paper is we say, okay, you're going to go build all these projects. You're going to upload them to your GitHub. You're going to work on your GitHub and your LinkedIn profiles and your resume so that it all looks great. So there's like all these things you can do to make yourself look great on paper. And then once you go into the interview, it doesn't matter whether you have the degree or not. All that matters is the concepts, right? So assuming you actually did the program, you'll look really great in the interview as well. So really the top three things, just to kind of rattle them off again, are like your resume, your GitHub should have some really great portfolio projects that show your skills, and then optionally like a LinkedIn that kind of ties all that in together.
Couldn't agree more with that because in India we have a lot of people, billions of people. So obviously we have a lot of we have hundreds of thousands of engineers graduating every year, and around studies show that around 49-50% of folks are unemployed. And the pattern I've seen in universities, including mine, is as it's the same thing you are mentioning. So you know, not focusing much on the skill set because I don't know. Being a computer science student, you are privileged a little bit as compared to other fields. Like so much you can do, high paying jobs, work from your home, remote work. Um, I don't like to comment on like things I don't have experience with, so I don't know what it's like with like the other fields. But in computer science, the horizons are just endless possibilities. You're not getting a job, and if you have the skills, you can do your own startup, for example. This is not startup advice, by the way. But I'm just saying there's so much you can do if you have the skills. That's all that's required. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of riff on that last thing you said, um, one thing I will mention is assuming you haven't done a bunch of interviews yet, I have noticed some people assume that it's easier to start a startup than it is to get a full-time job. And that's not the case most of the time. That doesn't mean I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from starting a startup. I think it's awesome. I think it's fun,
Hmm.
and I think if you're into it, you should do it. Um, but it is not easier if you're just trying to put your development skills to work. I would recommend absolutely
Hmm.
first trying to apply for full-time jobs. You're going to learn a lot, and it's going to be easier, and probably more educational, to be honest, at least for a couple of years while you get industry practice as a developer.
Yeah. Speaking of startups, I the very first open source cafe episode I did was on this, so check it out. And yeah, Lane, thanks a lot for joining. Really appreciate you giving the time. For everyone else, check out boot.dev. You can use my code Kunal Pushpa, I believe that is, but you can find the links in the description below to get some discount. And I highly recommend it. I get reached out for a lot of collaborations by various edtech companies, and I just say, I don't resonate with what you're doing. So it's really important to, understand, the things and the great work that folks are doing in the educational community. And like Lane mentioned as well, that there are so many resources, but it's hard to find the right one. Um, Learning is all about online learning, especially it's also all about like especially for developers communities, right? Learn in a community together, it's going to be a great learning experience. And I think that's what courses should be, like selling content and getting folks involved in communities rather than like selling dreams, like many people do.
Yeah,
Buy my course and you will get this, you'll become a millionaire. Those are things I don't encourage. But yeah, check out boot.dev, highly recommended. You'll Folks are requesting data structures, so you can check out some of the exercises and courses over there. Golang and for DevOps and JavaScript and stuff like that, Python even. So yeah, pretty cool stuff, and you can learn a lot. Lane, any closing remarks?
Thanks so much, man. It means a ton hearing that from you. I'm glad you've liked what you've seen so far, and yeah, super excited to see some of you over in the Discord and in the courses. I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone has. So
Yeah, and if you have any feedback or questions, I'm sure Lane would be happy to answer that. You can reach out to him, and always reach out in public. So ask in the Discord channel if you have any feedback for like Boot.dev, even like something you would want to see or something. Go ahead. Yeah, cool,
absolutely
cool.
perfect.
All right, well, thanks for watching, everyone. Check out the links in the description below. We'll see you in the next one. Good luck on your learning journey.